Alright, today we're talking about rounds 5 through 9 in fantasy football drafts. Before we get into it, you thought I was going to say subscribe, didn't you? No, before we get into it, I want to talk about some of the ADP predictions that we've made on this page. Nobody can be right 100% of the time, but I've done a pretty great job of getting you those early accurate predictions thus far, and the proof is in the pudding. Where I was wrong was Romeo Doubs when he was at 108. I said that might be a little too high for him, but his stock has gone up. He's at 104 now. But a lot of the players that I recommended have been rising in the ranks, okay? Christian Watson, I plugged him at 88. He's now up to 79. Blake Corum was at 130 when I recommended him. He's now at 122. Will Levis, I told you he was an absolute steal at 180. There's a full round difference there now because he's up to 167 overall. A few days ago, I mentioned that Braylon Allen will not be in the 200s much longer. And sure enough, he was at 206 then, and he is 198 now. I recommended a few fade candidates as well. I told you 17 was way too high for Kyron Williams. He's at 25 now, okay? I told you Stephon Diggs was not worth it at 26. He's back at 32. You can get yourself some savings there. I also told you fade Rome Odunze at 71. He's now at 78, and I still say fade him. That is way too high to be paying a wide receiver 3. So again, while not everyone can be right 100% of the time, and I most certainly can't, I'm definitely proud of some of the early accurate predictions we've got going. So with that, now do me a favor, please hit that subscribe so that you can keep up with this channel, because as a small channel, we're not going to show up in feeds a lot. So you definitely want to subscribe to keep up with it all. And let's get into it. Round 5. Picks 49 to 60. Still some pretty high draft capital there, okay? Not quite a first, second, third round pick, but round 5 is a make or break one for sure. There's some players I love, not many players that I hate. There's sort of a lot of mid players in there in my opinion. But the one I do think is an absolute steal is actually the last player, Alvin Kamara at 60. Okay, now I know there is a little bit of rumors going around with him holding out. These things usually take care of themselves, and his ADP is probably going to drop because of it, and that's when we want to snag them up, okay? Josh Jacobs owners probably saw this last year. When Jacobs was holding out, his ADP fell 10, 15 points, and the drafters who realized that 98% of the time these holdouts work out, they reaped the benefits with those savings. So today I'm plugging Alvin Kamara big time. He averaged more fantasy points per game last season than just about every player in front of him. He averaged more than Joe Mixon, James Cook, Isaiah Pacheco, Derrick Henry, Travis Etienne, Saquon Barkley, Devon Achane, Rashad White, and they're all going ahead of him. Okay, I'm sure one or two of them will beat out Kamara in the rankings, but at 60, he's an absolute steal. He averaged 7 targets per game that last year. And last year, everyone was worried about the suspension that he was facing, that 3-game suspension. By week 8, he was leading all backs for receptions. So I don't know why people fade Kamara. He seems to prove them wrong time and time again. I think he's going to do the exact same thing this year. The runner-up for round 5 for me is Keenan Allen. I wasn't in love with him when he was going 42nd, 43rd overall, but now there's a nice discount on that price. He's back at 57. And with the money that the Bears are paying him, and considering the fact that they have a rookie quarterback starting, Keenan Allen is going to be that safety net for Caleb Williams, okay? Keenan Allen's going to run a lot of those short, slanty sort of routes that he's done for years. He may not have a huge target share like he had with the Chargers. He might not get these insane 14 targets a game, but I think that he's definitely going to fall within that 6 to 8 targets, 7 to 9 targets a game, which is pretty good for the 4th to last pick in round 5. The player that I'm most concerned about in round 5, and I think it's a high risk, high reward sort of thing, I'm not going to endorse him. I would rather take Kamara or Allen over him, but I know a lot of people are bullish on one, Anthony Richardson, okay? Couple reasons why I'm going to fade Anthony Richardson personally. And I know if he works out, he's an absolute steal in round 5. If he puts those legs to good use and he's cranking out those 25, 30-point games, then he will prove me wrong. But I'm a little skeptical, largely because when you look at his injury history, he tore his meniscus in 2021. He had 2 concussions in college. He's now dealing with his latest injury. This is not a great trend, and especially for a quarterback who's going to be taking a lot of shots if he's planning on using those legs. This injury history does give me a little bit of pause. Now let's talk about him as a passer. His college completion rate, and I know we had a very limited sample size on Anthony Richardson, both in the NFL and in college, but what we did see of him, his completion rate in college was 53%. Not the best. In those few games that he played in the NFL, he had a 59%. Still not wonderful. His yards per attempt is pretty bad. The only player who did worse than him for yards per attempt was Bryce Young, who's going 180th overall, over 120 picks later. His yards per attempt was 6.8. Now his yards per completion is pretty good. It's 11.5. It's actually higher than some of the quarterbacks going ahead of him. But with that low completion percentage and the injury history, I'm probably going to fade Anthony Richardson. There's some tight ends available in round 5. Kincaid, Mark Andrews. They can be good picks. You know, it's important to never undervalue the tight end position. I do think there's some players of equal quality later on, maybe the Goddards of the world. Even I think Pat Freiermuth might have a bigger than thought year this year, but you could pick up one of them. Round 5, nothing much to scream over, but nothing terrible. All right, round 6, picks 61 to 72. My absolute favorite here is Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley has everything he needs right in front of him for a monstrous year. And a reason that I love Calvin Ridley for best ball is he is such a high ceiling player. He hits those 25-point games. His floor is very low. I'll be the first one to admit that. When he has a bad game, it's not great. It's 4 points. But for best ball specifically, if you need that high ceiling, Calvin Ridley's an excellent candidate. And the Titans want to see him succeed. They are paying him a ton of money to be there. We also need to separate last year from this year, right? Last year was last year. It's out there. This year is this year. And the Titans have gone through a ton of changes. It is no longer the Derrick Henry, Mike Vrabel Titans. They brought in Brian Callahan from the Bengals. We know he wants to throw. And it really looks as though he's trying to replicate what he had with the Bengals with the Titans, with Calvin Ridley filling that Jamar Chase role, DeAndre Hopkins filling the T. Higgins role, and Tyler Boyd filling the Tyler Boyd role. Okay. Also worth noting, and this is part of why I love Will Levis so much this year. His left tackle last year, Andre Dillard, was the absolute worst tackle in the league for pressures and sacks, Andre Dillard. They got him out of there, and they invested in that line to protect Will Levis. They have big J.C. Latham in there now. So with this change in regime, this change in philosophy, this incredible wide receiver trio, a bolstered offensive line, there's high potential here, and I would absolutely recommend grabbing Calvin Ridley in round 6. Currently going 64th overall. My runners-up for that round is, funny enough, DeAndre Hopkins. For kind of the opposite reason. Hopkins has been in the league for a while. He's not what he was a few years ago, but he still has a very high floor, which in its own way is beneficial at times for best ball. A lot of times, of course, we are looking for that boom or bust potential, and we want those giant games. And Hopkins will probably break out a giant game or two throughout the year, maybe even 3. But he is a very high floor player. I don't see him getting less than 10 points very often. So he can sort of act as your safety net at that spot in the draft, especially going in round 6. You wouldn't want to use that philosophy early on, but at round 6, you can afford that little flexibility. So that's the mindset of your drafting Hopkins. The ones I'm iffy on are Jones and Ingram. I could see both of them having a great year as long as they stay healthy. Jones, when he booms, he booms. The only thing I would say, if you're drafting Jones, pick up Ty Chandler for sure. Handcuff him. Handcuffing is how you win in leagues. The fade candidate for this round, please do not draft him. Please don't do it. David Montgomery. The only path that David Montgomery has to being relevant at that spot in round 6 in fantasy football is if Jahmyr Gibbs gets injured. During the first 4 games of last season, when they were easing Gibbs in, Montgomery averaged 22 carries per game. That's phenomenal. The last 4 games, when we saw that it is now the Gibbs show in Detroit, he averaged 12 carries a game. So that is a huge difference there. 22 carries to 12 carries to end the season. Please avoid David Montgomery. Round 7, picks 73 to 84. This is one of my favorite spots in this draft. There are players here that are worth reaching for. If you're not loving somebody in round 6, do not be afraid to reach into round 7, especially because you cannot be beholden to these rankings. We've already seen that they are constantly moving. We know that people are going to jump 1 or 2 rounds at times. People are going to fall 1 or 2 rounds at times. So in June, this is not the time to be beholden to the rankings. This is the time to confidently make your picks and trust that the players who you are getting a value on will indeed play higher than that ADP they were at. So round 7, picks 73 to 84. My favorite, I'm going to keep plugging him, Christian Watson. I think he has an excellent opportunity to have a breakout year this year. He was never playing at 100% at all last year. He missed the first few games and missed some intermittently throughout the season, and he was just obviously never at 100%. He still had some big games in there, well over 20 points a few times. But now that he's identified the root of his problem, you cannot deny that this guy is an athletic freak. He is lightning fast. He's big. He's getting better at high pointing the ball. I think that this is the year that Christian Watson establishes himself as the wide receiver 1 in Green Bay. My runner-up is James Conner. He is the last pick in round 7. James Conner blew up the last 4 games of last year. And throughout last year, he faced a ton of stacked boxes when the Cardinals were having a little bit of a QB carousel with Josh Dobbs. Also considering the fact that the Cardinals have drafted Marvin Harrison Jr., he's going to take the edge off the top of defenses. He is going to force them to move back. James Conner will not be faced with so many stacked boxes, and the fact that he did so well facing so many stacked boxes should make anybody bullish on James Conner. The only concern with Conner is his injury history. But with where he's going, the very last pick of round 7, excellent candidate pick to pick up. And certainly one you probably want to handcuff him. You can take the flyer risk on him as well, but definitely recommend James Conner. Also love Zamir White in this round. Okay, Zamir White, again, as you're seeing, is sort of a motif with a lot of the players I'm recommending, has a huge opportunity in front of him. Josh Jacobs is out of the Raiders. Zamir White was playing behind a pretty middle of the rank at best line last year. They got rid of Van Rotten there at guard. Now, Van Rotten took by far the lion's share of the snaps at the guard position. He had 400 run blocking snaps, 1,000 total snaps, and they were not very good. But the Raiders drafted Jackson Powers-Johnson, arguably the most versatile lineman in this draft. I know some people love Barton and some of the others, but JPJ is going to fill a need there, and he is a fantastic run blocker. So Zamir White, excellent candidate, high upside, minimal risk. I would definitely recommend him. Dak Prescott's also in this round, and Dak Prescott really signifies that last chance of high volume quarterbacks who consistently put up high 20, low 30 games last year. Now, if you didn't pick up one of the previous quarterbacks in a different round, Dak Prescott's really a steal here at round 7. When you look at what he did, and knowing that they are going to lean on the passing game, they kind of showed that they don't care that much about the running game, right? I know they brought Zeke back, But we all know that Zeke is not what Zeke was. That's why they let him leave in the first place. And they have Rico Dowdle and Deuce Vaughn. This is going to be a high-octane passing game. And Dak Prescott looks as though he has a lot of volume coming his way. The one that I would fade, Rome Odunze. You should not be drafting a wide receiver 3 in round 7, period. I don't even think there's anything more to explain there. DJ Moore and Keenan Allen are going to be those guys. Rashee Rice is also in here, and he is such a question mark. Nobody knows what's going to happen with his suspension looming. Like I mentioned with Kamara, sometimes people get a little bit jaded by suspensions, right? That 3-game suspension for Kamara did not derail his fantasy season whatsoever. And when you really think about it, a lot of players miss a few games regardless with injury. It'd be interesting to know how long Rashee Rice is going to be suspended for. Very, very risky play. A lot of upside if he does play. But just know that if you're picking him, you're taking a risk. There is a player here that needs to be going at least 2 rounds ahead of where he's being drafted. Najee Harris, currently going 92nd overall. Najee Harris last year faced more stacked boxes than any running back in the NFL because no team respected Kenny Pickett here, Mason Rudolph there. They could bring everybody forward and operate just comfortably. That's not going to happen this year. Whether it's Fields or Wilson who steps up at quarterback, teams are going to have to respect their passing game a lot more, which is going to free up that front 7. Najee Harris also dropped some pounds this year, okay? Not too much, which is a good thing because he benefits from being a bigger back, but he's now at 235, so he might be a little more agile and still have that bulldozing element to him. Also worth noting, he's on a prove-it year. That fires up a lot of players. We've seen before, once players sign the big contract, their production does take a hit. But when they have a fire lit under them, like Najee is going to have this year, it typically elevates their game, especially at the running back position, because every running back needs to have a chip on their shoulder right now with how undervalued that position is. All right. Also love Jordan Love in this round here because similar to how Dak represented the last of the upper echelon quarterbacks in round 7, Jordan Love has such a high floor here. He had 10 games that were over 20 points last year. If he replicates that and you get him in round 8, that's a pretty solid QB1. And especially in best ball, it's nice to have that guy with a high floor, comfortably getting you around 20 points, 22. And he will have his games where he booms as well and gets into those higher 20s, maybe a low 30 here or there. The player who I'm absolutely fading, I am not buying into the hype one bit. The only type of league where you should maybe consider him is Dynasty. But for redraft and best ball, don't fall for it with Jonathan Brooks this year. And I know I'm the odd man out here, but let me make my case. Jonathan Brooks had a top 3 O-line in Texas. The Panthers barely have a top 25 O-line. They didn't invest in it whatsoever in the draft. They signed 3 linemen, Josh Nijman, not great, Damian Lewis, not great at run blocking, and Robert Hunt, who is respectable. But that is not enough to cover up the flaws with this line. Also, with the Panthers' game script and how habitually they are trailing games in the second half does not equate to success for running backs. They're going to be passing the ball. They're going to be trying to cover up missed ground. So that is not favorable for Jonathan Brooks either. Also worth noting, the Panthers on May 6th, after they drafted Jonathan Brooks, shelled out money to go get Rashad Penny. They have 4 running backs in their top 51 right now. They don't even need to tell us outright that they're not confident about Brooks' availability because they are saying it right there. By contracting that many RBs, that shows they have very little confidence in his availability, which is the last reason why I'm not drafting him. He's not that far removed from that torn ACL, and it was a grade 3. That's not great for a number of reasons. Number one, he is going to miss just about the entire offseason program, which is not the transition that you want from college sports to the professional league. Number 2, will he even be available the first week? I honestly don't know. Number 3, with a player such as him, who benefits so much from making cuts laterally and his agility, an ACL is the worst injury. Look at Javonte Williams. Javonte Williams was that exact same sort of player, benefited moving laterally, making cuts, and once he tore his ACL, his yards per attempt dropped over a full yard. The ACL is not the injury that these sort of players who work on agility want. So for that reason, I am fading Jonathan Brooks. If you enjoyed that video, do me a solid, hit that subscribe. Check out some of our other videos as well. We've got full detailed analysis on wide receivers, running backs, and we'll be doing a little bit more with quarterbacks. So make sure that you subscribe so that you can keep up with all the news.